Many landscape photography tips for beginners tends to revolve around camera buttons and camera features. But these tips are often technical and not really what you need when you're new to photography. In this video I'm sharing 5 tips you should pay close attention to if you want to develop your landscape photography skills faster. Hi, I'm Kim from Landscape to Art, and I'm here to help you improve your landscape photography with the focus on developing your skills as a photographer and less on the gear and technical aspects. So if this is your first time here, make sure to click the subscribe button. It's easy to get the impression that landscape photography tips that are aimed at beginners are about camera gear and camera settings. But of course the technical aspects are just a small part of photography. So why do you think some photographers can take amazing photos with their smartphones? If you are new to photography and already have a camera, I can assure you this. The camera is good enough and you don't need to buy a new one. Not for now. Get some experience first. When I started to learn photography, I overlooked, or more precisely, I neglected many of the tips I'm sharing with you in this video. And with that said, let's jump right in. My first tip is get comfortable with the camera you already have. Camera gear is of course important, but it can also be a disturbing factor when you learn photography. The gear can take your focus away from what's more important. So let's say one example is if you spend a lot of time reading camera reviews and ads, this can of course, it's a huge time waster. I have spent countless hours reading ads pages in the many photography magazines I read when I was a newbie photographer. And not only was I dreaming about my next camera, but of course it was also cool to be able to brag about camera specifications and the latest and greatest camera gear when I met photography friends and I met at the local camera club. The fact is, none of this knowledge made me a better photographer. The best advice I can give is to learn how to use and get comfortable with the camera you already have. When you know for sure the camera is limiting you one way or another, it might be the time to consider an upgrade or adding a new lens, but not until then. But more often you are the limitation, it's not your camera. And the less experience you have, the more likely you are the limiting factor. It can sound counterintuitive, but if you bring too much gear with you when you're out shooting, it might have a negative impact. The camera stuff can simply get in your way and take the focus away from the scene in front of you. And if you're swapping lenses and instead of concentrating on the composition, you can ruin very good photo opportunities. The scene and how you want your image to look determines which camera setting and lens you need to use to get the required result. And don't do the opposite and let the gear decide the result. By doing this, you're approaching photography backwards. And if you're total newbie to landscape photography and you feel stressed about all the tech and the gear, just use your smartphone. I find I take more and more landscape photos with my phone. And it's convenient and the phone is always with me. Modern cameras and smartphones can handle both exposure and focus very well in most situations. And the advantage of using the smartphone is you can focus your efforts on finding the best possible composition. This brings us to tip number 2. And tip number 2 is learn composition from day one when you start photography. Few beginner photographers are aware of composition and the impact composition has on the photography. This awareness of composition comes later in the learning process. In my opinion, composition is the most important part of photography. When you see a photo you like, there is a reason. This photo it's most likely well composed. This doesn't necessarily mean that you have to understand photography composition. You don't have to know everything about composition to like a photo. It's the same with music. When you listen to music and you enjoy listening to a song, you don't have to understand musical notes to like the music. You just know when a song is good. And the reason you like the song can be the melody, the rhythm or the lyrics. My point is that the song is pleasing for your ears. It's well put together or composed. But if you are to create music yourself, you must know the fundamentals like the notes. It's exactly the same with photography. You must grab the viewer's attention, and it must be pleasing for the eyes. To make pleasing photos, you have to learn and understand how to compose and use composition techniques. Photography composition is a skill most photographers spend years to learn. And after many years, I still find some scenes very challenging and struggling to find good compositions. But I keep going, keep working on it. And the more complex the scene is, the harder it is to get a good composition. So I recommend you to look at images and learn as much you can. Study and understand the concepts. Spend time watching other photographers' work. You try to understand why you like some photos and other not so much. What's the difference between the photos? And more importantly, if you don't go out and shoot, you will not learn composition. It means you maybe have the knowledge, but you don't have the skills. And it's a big difference between knowledge and skills. It's like you don't learn how to swim until you jump into the water and get to practice. Finally, the great thing with composition is you can practice with any camera. You can practice anywhere, anytime. And tip number 3, learn everything you can about light. The most important and most viewed landscape photos are taken when the light is good. Most of us take light for granted. It's like it's either bright or dark. When I started to learn photography, I was not aware of that light has different properties. And all these properties has an important impact in landscape photography. Light has different colors, as you probably know, and it has direction. Light can have intensity, different intensities. And so let's just look at a couple of photos. This is an image I took a day. It was overcast. It's winter and it was just cloudy. But I came here because of the nice reflections and the frozen ice. But I was of course not happy because there is no color in the image. It's quite dull, but kind of I like the composition. But the day after, the conditions were totally different. So this is the image I took just one day after. And the sky was blue. It was late afternoon, so you can see this orange glow on the trees. And also the textures on the snow. Because the sun was low on the sky, the shadows created textures in the snow. But the composition is more or less the same. But it's two different images. So if you compare them, the one is almost like a black and white, and the other is a nice kind of a color photo. As you continue learning photography, light becomes more than just light. It becomes the subject itself. And you will soon see that when you start to look for and recognize light. Whenever you are, even if you're not photographing, you will recognize the light. And typically landscape images are shot early morning or late afternoon. And these times are referred to as the golden hours because the warm golden light at that time. It's the landscape photographer's favorite time and favorite light. So if you want to be serious landscape photographer, you have to get out of bed early, sometimes painfully early, or you have to stay up late to capture the best light at the end of the day. And the ultimate goal as a landscape photographer is to be able to deal with all kinds of light. Because you can make great photos even if it's not the golden hours. You can photograph all day, but you have to understand the light. And tip number 4, it's take your time at the scene. Never rush at the scene. And this tip is somehow related to the previous tip. If you want to capture the best light, you must come early to a scene and prepare to stay late. Many photographers pack the camera bag and head home as soon as the sun has moved below the horizon at sunset. But often the most beautiful light and colors can appear after the sun has set. Similar, the light can be amazing also the minutes before sunrise. So don't forget to look behind you, because actually some of the best light can appear on the sky behind your back. Another important tip to be aware of when you approach a new scene is the first vantage point you get to is rarely the best. So that's why you should spend some time just moving around. Try different camera positions. try to figure out how you can get the most out of the scene. Here are a couple of examples I have taken from one of my favorite places. This image is, my goal here was to photograph the island. This is the first setup. I came here and tried this composition. It's working quite well. There are lines leading towards the island, but to me it's the image is a little bit too right, balanced to the right. So actually it's not balanced, it's right heavy. So I tried to move around and I just moved a little bit to the right here, and that made this composition. Now I have the rocks, the foreground rocks here more like in the center, so it's a more balanced photo. But I still thought I could do more, so I continued watching and looking around. Then I came up with this one, which is probably my favorite from this shoot. Now the island has focus, but this little rock in the foreground here it leads you towards the background. And it's a more minimalistic photo, and of course it's subjective, but I like this one probably the best out of the three of them. So you can give your comments in the section below, whatever photo you prefer of these three. All the three of these images are taken within 4 or 5 meters distance from each other. But I spent time at the location and did not rush, so I managed to make several quite different images from the same place. As I said, it's one of my favorite local spots. I tend to come back here again and again. And I have made a video about how shooting locally can help you improve your landscape photography, and the link to the video is up here. And tip number 5 is ask better questions. And this tip is so important, but yet so little talked about. It's not a coincidence cameras and lens reviews outperform most other videos here on YouTube, on photography channels. And it makes sense. When you are new to photography, you don't know what you don't know. So you start to look for information about what you believe is the most important. And for you, that's at this time, it's camera and lenses. You search for something like, which camera should I buy for landscape photography? And when you are new to something, no matter what it is, it's easy to dig into the wrong stuff. Photography is no exception. I have heard many times people say you must have a nice fancy camera because your photos look so good. In this person's head, my camera makes my photos. So when he learns photography, he will consume information like through a filter. He will search for the solution in the camera only, and by reading reviews and looking for the next camera to buy. Of course, a better one. What this person wants to hear is what he already knows. I need a better camera. He's likely to disregard any contrary to what he already knows. What he should do instead is to ask better questions. It's not easy, but don't ask what camera should I buy for landscape photography or which lens is best for landscape photography. There is no such thing. All cameras and lenses are good enough for landscape photography. So there is a saying, there are no right answers to wrong questions, and I like that. The question you should ask instead is, how can I get better at using my camera? How can I create better compositions with the lens I already have? And until you understand the basic concepts of photography, no camera or lens will make your photos look better. I hope you really found these tips useful and that they have pointed you in the right direction. And at least you should have a better understanding on what to focus on when you strive to improve your landscape photography. Composition, light and your creative vision is so much more important than the camera and the gear. And by asking better or different questions and more relevant questions when you search for information, you can navigate away from all the clutter and information overwhelm. If you want to learn more about composition in landscape photography, I recommend you watch this video. And no, if you like this video you just watched, consider giving it a thumbs up. So until next time, ha det bra, goodbye.